The Quiet and the Undone. A Hood Eloquence original story. Chapter 1. The Catalog of Silence. Candice Brown had a particular way of moving through the stacks. It was measured, deliberate. Each step placed with the quiet authority of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that she was the most intelligent person in any room she walked into, and had decided, equally long ago, that no one needed to know that. Her reading glasses, tortoiseshell frames on a slim gold lanyard, rested against the front of her blouse like a piece of understated jewelry. Her locks, thick and heavy and the color of midnight, were pinned up in a crown that sat above her head like something regal. She was 30 years old and carried herself as though she had been 30 for a very long time, as though she had skipped straight past the uncertainty of her 20s and arrived at composure fully formed. The Hargrove Memorial Library at Calhoun HBCU was her domain. 12,000 square feet of climate-controlled sanctuary, organized with a precision that bordered on reverence. Students came to her with their thesis panic and their overdue fines and their inability to locate the periodicals section even though the sign was clearly visible from the main entrance, and she helped them all with the same calm, patient efficiency. She never raised her voice. She rarely smiled without cause. She listened in a way that made people feel heard without feeling indulged. They called her Dr. Brown, though her doctorate was in library science and not the kind that required a white coat. They called her that because she had earned a deference that exceeded her title, because there was something in the way she carried knowledge, like it was weight she had chosen to bear rather than burden she had been handed, that commanded it. On this particular Tuesday in late October, she was reshelving the periodical Returns herself, because she had sent Marcus home early with his head cold and Deja was covering the circulation desk. And Candice did not trust student workers with the periodicals. She was particular about the periodicals. She was also, beneath the composed exterior that 14 years of academic professionalism had carved into her bearing, profoundly, quietly, devastatingly lonely. Not in a way she would have admitted to anyone. Not in a way she fully admitted to herself most days. But it lived in her, a low hum behind the sternum, a frequency she had learned to mostly tune out. She had been good at tuning it out for a decade, punctuated by 3 relationships in the last 2 years that had each, in their own way, confirmed what some part of her had feared, that she was too much for the men who wanted her quiet, and too quiet for the men who wanted more. Darnell had wanted a trophy and had not expected her to have opinions. Marcus, not her Marcus, a different Marcus, a visiting professor from the engineering department, had wanted a companion for his loneliness without actually wanting the inconvenience of her presence in his real life. And Terrence, the last one, the one that still made her jaw tighten when she thought about it, had wanted to be impressed by her and had resented her for it simultaneously, a particular kind of emotional violence that left no marks. She was done. She had decided this in the parking garage 3 weeks ago when she drove away from Terrence's apartment for the last time, her hands steady on the wheel, her face a mask, and beneath that mask, something going terribly, quietly still. She was done with letting men into the careful architecture of her life. What she was not done with, what she would never be done with, what had in fact become more urgent in direct proportion to how locked down she had become in every other arena, was dancing. Chapter 2. Underground. The place was called The Root. It did not advertise. You got there by knowing someone who knew someone, by a text message from a contact saved only as J in your phone, by an address that changed every 3rd weekend to stay one step ahead of noise complaints and the particular species of colleague who would not understand. The Root operated in the basement of a repurposed commercial building in a part of the city that had not yet been discovered by anyone who would ruin it, which was precisely why Candice had been coming here for 4 years. She came because no one from Calhoun came here. She came because here she was not Dr. Brown. She arrived at 11:15 on a Friday in a way that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who knew her professionally. The locks were down, all of them, a cascade that fell past her waist and moved when she moved, heavy and alive. Her skin, that deep, warm dark chocolate copper that she hid under cardigans and blazers all week, was bare at the shoulder, bare at the collarbone, her dress a deep burgundy that fit like it had been constructed specifically for the geometry of her body. No lanyard. No glasses. No careful arrangement of her face into professional distance. She looked, a colleague once might have said, like a completely different woman. She was. That was the point. The Root was deep house and West African percussion, and the particular compression of bodies in a dark room that had its own gravitational pull. The music did not ask you to dance so much as it made refusal physically uncomfortable, a biological imperative, and Candice answered it the way she answered everything she cared about, with her whole self, holding nothing back. She danced with the kind of freedom that had no self-consciousness in it. Her hips found the pocket of the beat without searching for it. Her arms moved like she was writing something in the air that only the music could read. Her locks swayed and her feet knew the floor, and she closed her eyes and became, for a few hours every few weeks, the version of herself that had wanted to be a dancer before the books had gotten hold of her and refused to let go. She had made peace with that trait a long time ago. The books had given her more than she could have imagined. But the dancing was what she kept for herself, the part of her that belonged to no institutional mission, no student need, no professional obligation. The dancing was hers. She was deep in it 40 minutes in, the crowd warm around her, the bass doing something gorgeous and unhurried to the floor beneath her feet, when she became aware of someone watching her. Not the idle watching of a room. Something with more attention in it. She turned, still moving, and found him. He was standing at the edge of the floor, a glass in one hand, the other in his pocket, and he was watching her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. He was tall, broad. A man who wore his age. She put him somewhere in his early 40s, like something he had grown into rather than surrendered to. His face was all structured planes and calm attention, and he was looking at her the way she sometimes looked at a book she already knew was going to matter. She held his gaze for a beat. Then two. Then she turned back to the music, because the music was there, and because she was not the kind of woman who let a man with a stare rearrange her evening. But she knew, without looking back, that he had not stopped watching. His name was William Douglas, and he had found the route the same way Candice had, through a chain of trusted recommendations that led here specifically because here was nowhere that anyone from his professional life would ever think to look. He was visiting faculty, technically. A dean of academic affairs at a university 4 states away, brought in by the board of Calhoun to assist with the transition following the retirement announcement of Dean Harold Whitmore, whose health had made what might have been a graceful, year-long handover into something that needed to happen within weeks. William was organized, discreet, and had been through 2 such transitions at other institutions. He was the right man for the task. He had arrived in this city 10 days ago, and he had thrown himself into the work because he was good at the work and because throwing himself into things was how he avoided the particular quietness of his own apartment at night. A quietness that had sharpened over the last 2 years since the end of a 12-year relationship that had dissolved not from drama, but from a gradual, mutual recognition that they had become 2 people who happened to live together and shared a mortgage and had stopped actually reaching for each other sometime in the last several years without either of them pinpointing when. He found the route because a colleague back home had described it with the specific reverence of someone describing something worth traveling for. He had not expected to use the information. He was not in the habit of going out when he was working in an unfamiliar city. Then on a Friday night, after a 12-hour day of reviewing transition documents and meeting with department heads and performing the careful diplomacy of institutional change, he had stood in the bathroom of his hotel room looking at his own face and thought, I am disappearing. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Incrementally. He was becoming a man whose life was entirely composed of confidence and nothing else, and he was 42 years old, and that seemed, standing in the bathroom of the Marriott courtyard, like a waste. So he had gone. He had put on something that wasn't a dress shirt, and he had gone. He had not expected her. He saw her from 30 feet away and felt something shift in his chest that was not a medical event, but felt like the thing medical events were modeled on: a sudden change in pressure, a system coming alert. She was dancing like she had been waiting her whole adult life to be exactly here, in this moment, with this music, and it was the most purely alive thing he had seen in longer than he could easily account for. He watched her the way you watch something beautiful and rare, knowing you are probably not supposed to stare and doing it anyway because looking away seems like the greater mistake. When she turned and met his eyes and held them, he felt the impact of it somewhere in his spine. When she turned away, he knew he needed to speak to her before the night ended. He did not know why. He simply knew it the way he knew certain things, with a certainty that arrived fully formed and did not require a justification. He waited. He was a patient man when the thing he was waiting for was worth it. An hour later, she was at the bar, her locks pulled over one shoulder, the dark skin of her collarbone gleaming with the honest evidence of dancing. He moved to stand beside her, and when the bartender moved away, he said simply, "You dance like you mean it." She looked at him. Up close the eyes were dark and sharp and thoroughly unimpressed by his existence, which he found immediately interesting. "Most people do," she said, "when they're honest about it. Most people are performing. You were watching pretty carefully to notice that." "I was," he said, without apology, without the duck and weave men sometimes did when caught looking. Just the plain fact of it. She studied him for a moment. The lack of deflection seemed to register. "William," he said, and extended his hand. She looked at the hand. Then she took it. "Candice. You from here? Long enough to count." She took a sip of her drink, something dark over ice. "You're not. Is it that obvious? You look at the room like you're still deciding whether to trust it." He smiled at that, a slow, genuine thing that rearranged his face considerably for the better. "How long did it take you to trust it?" "About a year." She paused. "I was stubborn. Past tense. She gave him a look that was almost a smile and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. They talked for a long time. Not about what they did that felt, in this space, like the wrong question, like asking someone at church their salary. They talked about the music and the way a good DJ understood momentum, and she told him she had once wanted to be a dancer, and the way she said it was not sad, exactly, but had the specific weight of a road not taken that she had visited enough times to know exactly what was missing from it. He told her he had once wanted to be an architect and had ended up building institutions instead of buildings, and she said those weren't entirely different things, and he said, no, they're not, are they? By midnight they were back on the floor, not touching but moving in the orbit of each other, the music warm and heavy between them. By 1 in the morning the orbit had narrowed. By 1:30, they were dancing close enough that he could feel the heat coming off her skin, close enough that the weight of her locks brushed his forearm when she moved, and the contact was somehow more disorienting than it had any right to be. He leaned close enough to speak against her ear and said, I have a hotel room that is very quiet and has good whiskey, and I would very much like to keep talking to you. She pulled back enough to look at him. Searching. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it or decide she could risk the absence of it. One night, she said. Clear. Unambiguous. One night, he agreed, meaning it or believing he meant it. He didn't know yet that one night would prove, in the accounting of his life, to be both true and not even close to sufficient. Chapter 3. What the Darkness Unlocks. The hotel room was on the 14th floor and the city spread out below the windows in a grid of amber and white light, and Candice stood at the glass with her arms crossed loosely, looking out. And William watched her from across the room and had the distinct sensation of being in the presence of something that required his full attention, something that would not be managed or catalogued or efficiently processed. She was extraordinary. She was also, he sensed, completely aware of exactly what she was doing and had not yet entirely decided what that was. He poured 2 glasses of the good whiskey he had promised and brought one to her, and she took it without turning from the window. You're not nervous, he said. It was not quite a question. I don't do this when I'm nervous, she said. I go home when I'm nervous. Then what are you? She finally turned from the window. In the low light of the room her skin was extraordinary, deep chocolate brown with a warmth in it like copper at the edge of firelight. The kind of complexion that photographs could never accurately represent because it required dimension and depth and the particular physics of the real. Her locks fell past her waist. She had taken off the heels at the door and was barefoot, which somehow made her seem more certain rather than less. Deciding, she said. What's the question? She looked at him for a long moment. Whether I want to be careful, she said, or whether I want tonight. He said nothing. He understood that this was not a moment that required his input. She made the decision visible in the way she set down her glass and came to him, and when she put her hands on his chest and looked up at him the deciding was over. And what replaced it was something that had been gathering between them since the moment their eyes had held across a crowded room. He kissed her slowly. Like he had the time. Like he intended to know exactly what he was doing before he moved on to whatever came next. She kissed him back with a thoroughness that would have surprised anyone who had only ever known her in daylight hours, in professional settings, in the careful composed world of Candice Brown the librarian. This was the other version. The one she kept underground. They moved toward the bed with the unhurried gravity of 2 people who had already agreed on the destination and were content to take the road. What happened between them that night was not something either of them could have predicted, and both of them would spend considerable time in the days that followed trying to understand it. It began as the unfolding of 2 people who had been wound too tight for too long and had somehow, in each other, found permission to release. But it became something more specific than that. Something with edges and architecture, shaped by desire that reached deeper than the physical, into want and need and the particular vocabulary that bodies develop when they are finally, for the first time in a long time, being heard. William was attentive in a way that read almost like deliberation. He learned her quickly, catalogued her responses with the focused intelligence he brought to everything, and acted on what he learned. He found the places that made her breath change and the places that made her voice go low and thick, and he visited them with a patience that she had not encountered before, that made her understand he was not in any hurry, that he intended to know her thoroughly before the night was over. When she reached for him, he stilled her hands. Let me, he said. Quiet, but absolute. Something in her went very still. William. Let me, he said again, and his eyes held hers, and in them was not demand but invitation, the specific kind of invitation that was asking her to trust, to yield, to hand something over to someone who intended to take extraordinary care of what was given. She exhaled, slowly, and let her hands rest. He took a silk tie from the nightstand drawer, dark blue, still folded from his dry cleaning, and he looked at her with the question plainly in his face. And she looked at the tie and then at him, and something deep in her chest answered what his face was asking before she had consciously processed it. Yes, she said. He took her wrists together, and the silk was cool at first and then warm from their skin, and he secured them with a knot that held without cutting, and she felt the moment the restraint settled as a physical shift in her entire system, a vast, complicated relief, like a breath released from a tension she had not known she was holding. She felt her shoulders drop, felt the coil at the base of her spine release. Every day she was in command of everything. Every hour of her professional life required the specific vigilance of someone who carried the weight of an institution's knowledge and the trust of its students. She was always in control, always composed, always the capable, contained Candice Brown who never let the mask slip, never asked for too much, never made herself a burden or an inconvenience or a need. The silk at her wrist said, "Not tonight. Not here. Here, someone else is holding this." She closed her eyes and let go. He explored her with a thoroughness that had her arching against him, her bound wrists above her head, her locks spread across the pillow in a dark halo, her entire body a conversation he was learning the grammar of. He was not performing. She could feel the difference, could feel that his attention was genuine, that each discovery he made registered in him as something that mattered, that she was not a transaction but a territory he intended to know. "Tell me," he said against the curve of her throat. "Tell me what you want." "You know," she managed. "I want to hear it." She had not been with a man who asked her to speak in a long time, who wanted the words, who understood that the naming of desire was its own form of intimacy. She told him, quietly at first, then with less restraint, and he listened and acted and listened again, and the loop of it, her voice, his response, the evidence of his attention, became its own rhythm. When the first wave crested, long and deep and rolling through her, he brought his mouth close to her ear and murmured, low and warm, "There she is. Good girl." The words landed somewhere she had not known was reachable. Something broke open in her chest, not violently, but like a door that had been shut for a long time swinging wide on its hinges. She made a sound she had not known she was capable of making. Something between a sob and a gasp, something that was not sadness, but its structural cousin, the release of held tension so profound it arrived with its own emotion. He felt her response and went very still, watching her face. "Okay," he asked, and his voice had lost its authority and become something quieter and more careful. "Yes," she said, and she meant it. "Yes. Don't stop." He did not stop. The night had its own grammar. It moved through registers, urgent and slow, tender and demanding, and they followed wherever it led with the unspoken agreement of two people who have decided, for these hours, to be honest about every single thing. She found herself giving him commands in return, her hands free now, and discovered that directing him was its own intoxication, that the call and response of it, the way he answered her without hesitation, was as electric as anything else they did. She would say his name a certain way and he would know. He would ask if she was ready, and she would say prove it, and he would, comprehensively, and the laughter that came with that, the laughter neither of them had expected, made it human in a way that left her defenseless against what was happening. Every time she came apart, he anchored her. "Good girl," he said, the second time, and then the third, the phrase becoming a kind of call sign, a private language that meant, "I see you. You are safe here. You can fall apart and I am holding the pieces." The fourth time she shattered, he held her through the full rolling length of it, her face pressed to his neck, her hands gripping him, and she heard him say, very quietly, barely audible, the words arriving as though he had not entirely chosen them. "God, Candice. I think I—" He stopped himself, caught the rest of the sentence and held it back. She heard what had not been finished, felt the shape of it. Something moved through her, vast and terrifying and bright, and she pressed her mouth to his shoulder instead of answering and breathed, and did not say what was rising in her own chest like a tide. He held her for a long time after, his hand moving slowly through her locks, from crown to end, a rhythm like a metronome, like something meant to steady. "This was," he started. She said. "Not a word. Just sound." He seemed to understand that she was not ready for words, and so they lay quiet together in the dark, the city lights still spreading out below the window, and she thought, this is the part where I stay too long and want things I cannot have and get hurt again. She had a system for this. She had gotten very good at the system. When his breathing deepened and slowed and she was certain he was asleep, she dressed in the dark with the practiced quiet of someone who had made peace with leaving. She did not take his number from his phone. She did not leave hers. She took one last look at him in the dim room, the slope of his shoulder, the lines of his face relaxed in sleep, and felt the thing in her chest pull sharply and deliberately looked away from it. She took the elevator down alone. She walked out into the October air with her locks over one shoulder and her heels in her hand, and she breathed and breathed until the feeling had been categorized and filed somewhere manageable. One night, she had said. One night, he had agreed. She kept her end. Chapter 4. The residue of something real. In the morning, He woke up alone and felt the absence of her before his eyes were fully open. He lay still for a moment, the impression of her still in the sheets beside him, the particular quiet of a room that should have had someone in it, and he understood two things simultaneously, that she had left deliberately, and that he was not finished with her. Not finished. That was the closest he could get to it. He turned the night over carefully in his mind, the way you handle something fragile and valuable, and the closer he examined it the more certain he became that what had happened between them was not something that arrived all the time. He was 42 years old. He had been with women who were beautiful and women who were brilliant and women who had moved him, and none of them had felt like her, like something necessary, like someone his nervous system had been specifically calibrated to recognize. He had almost said it. 3 words in the dark, coming up out of some deep unexamined register, and he had caught them in time. Or maybe not in time, maybe she had heard the shape of what hadn't been said. He had felt something shift when he stopped, felt her go very still. He did not have her number. He did not have her last name. He knew her first name, and that she was from here, and that she danced like she meant it, and that she was the most singular person he had encountered in longer than he could calculate. He told himself he would let it be what it was. A perfect, complete thing. A night that would sit in his memory as a reference point for what was possible. He lasted 4 days before he started trying to find her. Candice, meanwhile, was doing what she always did when she needed to recalibrate. She went to work. She arrived at the library at 7:45 Monday morning, 20 minutes before anyone else. And she made the coffee and she walked the stacks and she ran her hand along the spines of the books and she let the specific quiet of an empty library settle her nervous system, the way it always had. The way it had been settling her since she was a child who understood that libraries were the only places where every kind of question was welcome and no kind of feeling was excessive because the books had already held all of it. She told herself she was fine. She was mostly fine. She was fine except for a low persistent vibration in her chest that she diagnosed, calmly and with her customary precision, as the entirely predictable emotional residue of a genuinely moving sexual experience, which was manageable, which would pass, which was not to be mistaken for anything that required action. She put on her reading glasses. She processed the new acquisitions. She advised 2 graduate students on their research methodologies. She attended a budget meeting in the administration building and took efficient notes and presented her case for the new database subscriptions with the measured clarity that always got her what she asked for. She was fine. She was fine until she heard the name at the end of the meeting, when Dean Whitmore's assistant mentioned that the visiting dean, a Dean Douglas, arriving from Harris University, was doing a walkthrough of administrative facilities later in the week as part of his transition assessment, which would include the library. The library. Her library. She heard his name, Douglas, and felt every composure she had rebuilt since Saturday morning undergo a rapid structural stress test. She was fine. She walked back to the library in the October air and told herself, it is a common name. It is not him. This is a very large metropolitan area with many universities and you are catastrophizing. She told herself this convincingly enough that she had almost stopped thinking about it by Thursday afternoon when she was coming out of the library's side entrance after a late meeting, her bag over one shoulder, her keys in her hand. And she nearly walked directly into William Douglas coming up the sidewalk toward her, looking down at his phone, in a charcoal blazer and a white shirt and an expression of concentration that completely failed to hide the fact that he was, in daylight, even more. Precisely what she remembered. They both stopped. He looked up. The concentration dissolved. Something moved across his face, recognition and relief, and something else she didn't want to examine. Candice. Her name in his mouth, casual as daylight, and she felt her whole chest respond to it. William. Her voice was steady. She was extremely proud of her voice. You're the visiting dean. You're at Calhoun, he said. Not a question. Working through it. Hargrove Library. She gestured vaguely behind her. He looked at the building. Looked back at her. The head librarian. That's me. A beat of quiet. Around them the campus moved, students crossing the quad, a professor on a bicycle, 2 maintenance workers with a cart of equipment. Ordinary, loud, completely indifferent to the fact that something significant was occurring on this particular patch of sidewalk. How are you? He asked. And said it like he actually needed to know. I'm well, she said. Careful. Busy. It's midterm season. Of course. He nodded. He was watching her face with the same attention he had watched her dance with, and she did not want to be watched like that right now, in daylight, on campus, where she was Dr. Brown and not anyone else. Can I? I have to go, she said. Pleasantly. Without heat. The professional smile, measured and correct. It was good to see you, Dean Douglas. The deliberate formality. The title instead of his name. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, of what she was doing. He did not push. Dr. Brown, he said. Matching her register precisely. Have a good evening. She walked to her car. She did not look back. She sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Chapter 5. The Campaign. He was not a man who gave up on things that mattered. He was also not a man who misread the situation. He saw exactly what she had done on the sidewalk, the title, the professional distance, the clean escape, and he understood it. He had met men who had not been careful with her. She had written it in the architecture of her withdrawal, in the particular precision of her exit. He did not blame her. He also knew what he had felt, and he knew what he had almost said in the dark of a hotel room, and he knew, with the same bone-deep certainty that had told him to go to the route on a Friday night when he might easily have stayed in, that he was not finished with Candice Brown. He needed to be careful. He was on her campus, in a professional capacity, with all the complications that implied. He would not be inappropriate. He would not make her workplace a place of discomfort. These were absolute lines. But there was room, within those lines, for honesty, for patience, for the slow and deliberate demonstration that he was not a man who was likely to waste what had been between them. He started with something small. On Wednesday she found, on her desk when she arrived in the morning, a small potted plant, a succulent in a terracotta pot with a card that said simply, "For the person who tends to everything else. W." She stared at it for a long moment. Then she set it on the windowsill where it would get the afternoon light. She told Deja it was from her aunt. She did not know why she said that. She also watered it every day without examining why. His tour of the library was scheduled for the following Tuesday. She prepared for it with absolute professional thoroughness, briefing documents, statistics on circulation and usage, the budget proposal for the new databases, a complete overview of the special collections. She dressed in her best blazer, her locks perfectly pinned, her reading glasses on their lanyard, every inch of her the definitive Dr. Brown. He came in at 2 o'clock with Dean Whitmore's assistant and 2 members of the board, and he shook her hand and called her Dr. Brown, and his handshake was professional and brief and gave nothing away. She gave him the tour she had prepared. She answered every question with the precise, confident authority of someone who knew this building the way she knew her own name. He was interested in everything. Genuinely. He asked questions that showed he had read the briefing documents thoroughly, which she had not expected, and the questions were intelligent and nuanced, about accessibility, about digital archive integration, about the special collections preservation protocols, and she answered them and found, against her intentions, that she was enjoying the conversation. He was good at his job. She had not anticipated that knowing this would affect her the way it did. At the end of the tour, when the others had moved ahead toward the exit, he lingered for a moment near the special collections room. "This is extraordinary," he said. "Meaning the collection, the building, her management of it. You've built something here." "The institution built it," she said. "The institution funded it," he said. "You built it. There's a difference." She looked at him. "Dean Douglas." "William," he said quietly. "When it's just us, I'd like to be William." She was quiet for a moment. "There's no just us," she said. "Not here." "Not here," he agreed. "But I'm not only talking about here. Candice, I know I have no standing." "I know I don't," he stopped. Recalibrated. "I just want a conversation. Coffee. Something without an agenda, in a place that's not this building." She looked at him for a long time. The composure held. Behind it, something was pulling hard in a direction she was actively refusing. "I'll think about it," she said finally. His face moved, just slightly. "That's more than I expected," he said. "Thank you." He caught up to the others. She stood in the doorway of the special collections room for a moment after he was gone, her hand on the doorframe. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. Chapter 6. The route again. She told herself she would not go back that Friday. She went back. She had not planned to. She had planned a quiet night at home with a book she had been wanting to get to for weeks, a glass of wine, an early bedtime. She had made this plan with genuine intention at 8 o'clock. By 10:15 she was in her car. She told herself it was not about him. That the route was hers long before he appeared in it, that she was not going to surrender her one private joy to the complication of a man she was not going to be with. She was going because she needed to dance, not because some part of her wanted to see if he was there. He was there. He was at the bar, not on the floor, and he saw her at almost exactly the moment she saw him, and neither of them pretended otherwise. He raised his glass slightly, a gesture that acknowledged her without demanding anything. She danced for 40 minutes without going near him. Good dancing. Real dancing, her whole body in it, her locks moving, the music doing what it always did. But she was aware of him the way you are aware of something bright at the edge of your peripheral vision. He came to find her on the floor eventually. Not presumptuous about it, he moved into her orbit and matched her rhythm and left her space, and they danced near each other without touching, which was its own form of honesty about what was between them. After a while she said, over the music, "I didn't think you'd come back." "I told you I'm not done with you," he said. Simply. Not menacing. Just true. William. I know, he said. I know you're protecting something. I'm not here to breach it. I'm just here to show you that I'm still here. She looked at him. He was sweaty from the dance floor and his expression was completely open, and it was the openness that undid her, because she had spent so long reading people and she could read the absence of calculation in him. The plain and uncomplicated fact of his being here, in this room, because she was here. One drink, she said. At the bar. And then we go our separate ways. One drink, he agreed. One drink became two. Two became a conversation that lasted until the place thinned out around them. Somewhere in the second hour she told him about Terrence, not completely, but enough, the outline of it, the particular way that particular kind of disappointment calcifies, and he listened without offering solutions or defenses of his gender, which she appreciated. He told her about the 12 years and the quiet dissolution, and the hotel bathroom where he had looked at himself and felt himself disappearing, and she said, incrementally. Like erosion. Exactly like that, he said. At close they walked out into the cold together, and she did not invite him anywhere, and he did not ask her to, and they stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the October air. Dinner, he said. Not here, not the route. Just dinner. Would you let me take you to dinner? She looked at the street. The empty sidewalk. The city going about its quiet 2 a.m. business. Yes, she said. She sounded like she was agreeing to something more complicated than dinner, because she was. His face did the thing it did. The slow rearrangement. Sunday, he said. Sunday, she said. She walked to her car. She was not fine this time. She was not fine at all. She was, she suspected, beginning to fall. Chapter 7. The Lesson of Being Swept. Sunday was dinner at a restaurant tucked into a brownstone neighborhood neither of them frequented, with candles on small dark tables and music that did not compete with conversation. He was there before her. He stood when she came in, which was an old-fashioned thing that she had not expected, and which did something to her she filed away to examine later. She had dressed in a way that was neither her work self nor entirely her underground self, something in between, a version of Candice Brown that existed in the private space between her two lives, softer and more available than Dr. Brown, less specifically armored than the woman in burgundy who had decided on a one-night stand. He noticed. She could tell he noticed without him making it a performance. You look beautiful, he said. Not a line. Not the opener of a script. Just an accurate statement of observation. Thank you, she said, and sat down and picked up the menu and felt her hands perfectly steady and her heart doing something irregular and inconvenient. They ate. They talked. The conversation had the quality of all conversations that are going somewhere real. It moved between levels, from the easy to the harder, from the public to the private, without effort or negotiation. He was funny in a dry, understated way that kept surprising her. She told him about the collection of signed first editions she kept in her apartment that she had never told anyone else about, and he asked about each of them with genuine curiosity, and she found herself animated in a way that she rarely was, gesturing with her fork, leaning forward. You come alive when you talk about books, he said, watching her. I always come alive, she said, slightly defensive. Not the same way. He was not challenging her. At work you're composed. Completely, impressively composed. When you talk about something you love he looked for the word. Unguarded. She sat back slightly. That's an observation. It's a compliment, he said. The unguarded version of you is, he shook his head slowly. Candice. She was quiet for a moment. People have wanted me to stay unguarded before, she said. And then were not prepared for what that actually looked like. I know, he said. I understand that I have not earned the trust that would let you believe I'm not one of those people. I know that's something I'd have to show, not say. He held her gaze. I'm willing to show it. I'm asking for the chance. She was quiet for a long time. Outside the window the street was damp from an earlier rain, the lights of the city refracted in puddles. I want to be swept off my feet, she said, finally. Quietly. The truth of it sitting in the air between them. I know how it sounds. But I always do the managing. I always do the caretaking. I've spent 10 years being the competent one, the reliable one, the one who holds things together, and I want, just once, to be the one someone takes care of. She looked at her wine glass. I just don't know how to let that happen. I don't know how to not manage it. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke his voice was even and warm. Candice, he said, being swept off your feet isn't something that happens to you against your will. It's something you allow. It's a skill. He leaned slightly forward. Let me teach you. She laughed genuinely, the surprised kind. That's either the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me or the most arrogant. Possibly both, he said. I'll let you decide. She was still smiling. She had not realized, until this moment, how rarely she smiled like this, unmanaged, unscheduled, the real thing. Okay, she said. Show me. And he did. Not that night, and not all at once. He showed her over the following weeks in the accumulated evidence of his attention, a book she mentioned in passing that appeared on her desk with a handwritten note inside the cover. A Saturday afternoon he organized around what she loved without telling her until they arrived, first at a record shop she had been meaning to visit for years, then a gallery, then the kind of long late lunch that exists outside of time. He texted her in the mornings, not too much, not too little, with the calibration of someone paying close attention. He called her once, late on a Tuesday, just to hear her voice, and the conversation lasted 2 hours and felt like no time at all. He showed up. That was the simplest way to say it. He showed up, consistently, without drama, and every time he showed up he brought more of himself with him. And every time he showed up, she noticed. The guard came down in increments. She did not take it down, it came down on its own, in his presence, the way a tightly wound thing releases given enough warmth and time. Chapter 8. The Addiction of Something True. The route on a Friday night, 6 weeks after the first. They did not plan to meet there. They stopped pretending this was coincidental by the 3rd week. They stopped pretending it was a coincidence the same way they stopped pretending they were only going to have coffee, or only going to have dinner, or only going to talk for an hour. The underground was their first language. The one they had found before they knew each other's last names, before the complication of professional proximity, before any of the real and earnest and terrifying work of learning each other in daylight. When they were on the floor of the route together, the language returned effortlessly, their bodies already fluent. They danced for a long time before they spoke. Then she looked at him and said, "Come home with me." He went still. "Candice. Not a one-night thing," she said. Clear. Unambiguous. "I know the difference. I'm not confused about what I'm asking." He looked at her for a long moment. His face was doing the thing she had come to know, the slow rearrangement, the composure giving way to something that was just him, without the professional frame, without anything between. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm terrified, but I'm sure." "Okay," he said. "Then yes." Her apartment was full of books. Of course it was. They were on every flat surface that wasn't a chair, in shelves that covered 3 walls of the living room from baseboard to ceiling, in neat careful stacks on the coffee table and the windowsill. It was the apartment of someone who had built herself a second home out of paper and ink, who had decided that language was the best available material for constructing a life. He walked in and stood still for a moment, looking around. "This is you," he said. Quietly. Meaning it completely. "All of it," she said, watching his face. He turned to look at her and his expression was so uncomplicated, so entirely present, that she felt the last of the architecture around her chest shift and settle. "I've been trying to figure out," he said, "what the right words are for what I feel about you. I keep finding that my vocabulary is inadequate." "You're the man who said sweeping someone off their feet is a skill," she said. "You're going to tell me you can't find the words?" "Some things are larger than vocabulary," he said. "You, as a librarian, have to appreciate that." She laughed. He crossed the room and cupped her face in both hands, and she let him, which was itself the extraordinary thing, let him, entirely, without managing it. "I want this," he said. "Not the route. Not one night, not one dinner, not something with an expiration date. I want to know you all the way. Every version." His thumbs moved gently along her cheekbones. "I want Dr. Brown, and I want the woman in burgundy, and I want everything in between. I want all of it, Candice." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright, and she was not going to apologize for that. "That's a lot to want," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm a patient man." She put her hands over his hands. Held them. "I'm going to need you to be," she said. "I'm going to make this harder than it needs to be sometimes. I'm going to run, probably. I'm going to manage when I should let go and shut down when I should open up and—" "I know," he said. "You don't know," she said. "Not yet." "No," he agreed. "Not yet. But I'm going to." He held her gaze. "That's the whole point." She leaned forward and kissed him, not the way you kiss someone who is temporary. The way you kiss someone you have decided on. Deliberately. With the full weight of choice behind it. He pulled her closer. The books stood their quiet watch on every wall. The city moved beyond the windows. And Candice Brown, who had been so carefully, so expertly, so protectively composed for so long, let herself fall, not into chaos, not into the recklessness she had feared, but into something that felt like solid ground finally found after years of walking on glass. She fell, and he was there. He was there. The end. A hood eloquent story.